Okay, so we're going to take a little look at Enscape today, specifically inside of Revit. I've got 2018.2 on my system here, but this plugin works back on previous versions of Revit as well. I believe back to sort of 15, so works with most of the versions of Revit that are being used out there in the industry today. And actually, it's so easy to use. It's a pleasure to use this application, and it really takes the pain out of what we want to do in and around visualization from a rendering perspective to get an output, but also from a coordination perspective as well. So let's just jump straight in. I'm opening up a sample file first of all, just to show you what the software can do, and then I'll kind of take away any questions that there might be about things being pre-generated or pre-set up with a brand new file from scratch. So what we have here is a relatively simple design inside of Revit 2018. A couple of things to point out. We're only using default Revit materials. That will become more apparent later. And we're using completely out of the box Revit RCP elements. They're just the ArcVision content, the standard ones that come with inside of Revit. So nice and straightforward, nothing overly complicated. And actually, all I'm going to do to begin with is just show you how easy this is to use. So I have a 3D model, and I want to be able to have a look at that model in a little bit more detail, rather than just turning it on to, ray traced or rendering inside of Revit. So let's come up to my Enscape tab at the top. I've got a number of settings which we'll go through a little bit later on, but for the purposes of today, I'm going to press one button. I'm going to choose my Revit view, which is my default 3D view. That's the only one I have in this particular model. I'm just going to press start. So I've literally opened up a file and I press one button. This will start the launch of Enscape. Typically the first launch is maybe a little bit slower than the second launch and the third launch, because it's got to load the plugin up. For larger models, it's a little bit slower than for smaller models, because naturally it's got to go through and send the data from the Revit interface into the Enscape plugin. But typically in this instance, it should be relatively fast. And the first thing that you'll see is this loading screen, which is fully customizable. But when that's passed, we actually get shown a live model. I'm just going to jump into full screen mode here inside of Enscape. And you'll instantly see that we have something that is looking better than what it was by default. And actually this is a live model, so I can choose to orbit around just by holding down my mouse button and moving my mouse. And then if I use my arrow keys on my keyboard, I can fly around. I have the ability to hold down Control or Shift to make that faster and get myself roughly over the floor. If I press the space bar on my keyboard, it will use gravity and position me on the floor. And then you'll notice instantly a couple of things. The grass is fully rendered. All of the RCP elements are fully rendered. And when I let go of my mouse and give it a couple of seconds, we get some very nice soft shadows, we get a very nice look and feel, and a very nice looking finished output without any input whatsoever. Now, what's nice about this is I can chop and change this as I walk around. So I'm just going to do an Alt and Tab into Revit. Just open up my Enscape settings over here. I'm currently on Ultra Quality with Automatic Resolution. I'm just going to bump that down to High for now, just so it's nice and clear and nice and crisp when I'm walking around the model. And then we're going to show that we can start walking around. We can get around onto this path here and we can start walking around the model. It uses settings like mouse smoothing, so that your mouse movements are nice and smooth, so it's not juddery at all. And we can very quickly start navigating around this building and seeing things in a different light. For example, if I come around here to the section of curtain wall on my left over here, if I just turn to face that, let go of my mouse for a second and let Enscape do its thing. Let's just Alt and Tab and go back into the settings and put it back on Ultra for the purposes of this section here. We should notice that that will go and it will iterate the image, iterate the image, iterate the image until it's got a really nice look and feel. Now, it's a little bit dark at the moment because we're sat in the shadow of the building, but that's not a problem with what we have in Enscape, because again, a couple of button combinations, which are all shown at the bottom of the screen should you not know them, I can hold down Shift and use my right mouse to change the time of day and physically move the sun in the sky. By default, that's using the Revit location functionality, so it's taking the information on the sun location inside of Revit. But we can move that in the sky, and again we can let go and let it go through that iterative process once again to give us our rendered, if you like, result. Let's continue walking around the building. Let's just come forward here. I'm just going to hold down my control to go a little bit faster and just make my way round to the center of this this building over here. Let's come over here, up this ramp, and we can head into the inside of the building. Now what you'll notice is the water texture just there is animated. So it's actually animating things like the water, the trees and things like that. Again, if we let go, it will stop that animation because it needs to go through and iterate so it can get to a sharper and more finished result. What's really nice is you'll notice that we have some default Revit lights over here. If I change the time of day so that we are twilight or at night time, you'll notice that all of the Revit lights, whether they are interior lights, lights within the pool, whatever they are, they all start coming on and activating. So it's that easy to go from a daytime render to a nighttime render. We just change the time of day. Let's drop it back to a daytime render. You'll notice the time on the bottom right hand side of my screen. Let's go for about 1:30 in the afternoon and head inside. So we'll go through this door here. We'll walk around to our right. And then we'll follow the corridor around to the left hand side. We'll head through this door over here. Excuse the food van that's just turned up outside. And then we can see that we now have an outside render at a specific time of day. Now what I really like about this is actually the ability that we have with inside of Revit. So whilst what it's doing is pretty good, remember at any time we can alt and tab into Revit. So I could come into Revit and I could say, okay, well actually what I'd like to do is look at this in a different light. So I can come into my settings. Let's just open up Enscape full screen with the settings open at the same time and say, I just want to see it in a white mode. I want to look at it like a paper model. So I can turn on white mode, which strips out all of the textures and allows me to look at the model as if it were paper. It still keeps the rendered grass, it still keeps the water textures, it still keeps the rendered RCP textures. But it will go through and it will make it look like a paper model instantly without the need to go through and do that in a painful way. Should you like sketchy lines, we can start working with them to make them very thick or very thin to get a really nice look and feel, sketchy feel render, should that be what we want to do. I'm just going to turn that back off. We can do the same thing with a polystyrene model. We can do exactly the same thing with a light view to actually get an idea of lux levels in and around the area that we are currently in, whether that's internally or externally within the building. Again, if we change the time of day with my right mouse and my shift key, you'll notice those lux levels changing as we go through different times of day. Ridiculously powerful and very, very fast. We've got some other options here. So we've currently got depth of field, which is actually making it look a little bit blurry. So I'm going to turn depth of field off. I'm going to leave auto exposure on, which makes sure that we are looking this in the nicest possible light. And we're also just going to maybe just play around with depth of field and show you that we can also go into our image, play with our contrast should we want to, play with our saturation should we want to. We have the ability to really chop and change the render so it looks however we would like it to look. We can play around with the bloom to make it look like there's more reflectivity or more light bouncing off things. We can play around with the ambient brightness and play around with the lens flare. So all of those kind of atmospheric look and feel that we might want to have and that we might want to play around with, we can literally come in and basically customize any element of this, whether it's the position of the clouds in the sky, the brightness of the sun, if it's nighttime, if we've got stars and moon. So if I turn the sun and change the time of day into nighttime, if I look up at the sky, we should be able to see stars and we should be able to see the moon as well, should we be able to find whereabouts it's located in this particular model, which I can't at this point in time. So we've got some really nice ability inside of this piece of software. Let's just reset the atmosphere tab. Let's just reset the image tab, just to take me back to my default settings. And then maybe we'll have a little walk around at night time. And we'll head back inside of the building. Now again, if you don't want it to be a little bit choppy when you're walking around, you can change the settings. For the purpose of today, I just want to walk around in this way. I can also reduce the size of the screen. So if you're running on a slightly lesser spec laptop, by reducing the size of the screen, you'll notice it makes it a lot quicker. It's not going to be realistic look and feel when you are actually walking around the model. The reason being is you've got to wait for it to go through and iterate the model and get rid of the noise and work on the reflections. It can't do that instantly. We don't have any grid cards set up or anything like that to do that with this system. But for the purpose of what we're doing, it's perfect because I can get into a position, I can stop and let the program go through and iterate, iterate and iterate again until we've got something that we are happy with. Again, we can come in at any time and head back to the settings and start tweaking our options. So maybe let's turn on light view in this corridor to get an idea of what's going on at night time with the lights that have been provided, and during the day when we're using the sunlight through the window on the right hand side. Now, for me, the single best thing about this application is the fact that we are live inside of our modeling environment at the same time as being in this virtual environment here. For instance, let's just dock that on the right hand side and dock Revit on the left hand side here. I'm just going to head over to my first floor plan because that's currently where I am within the building. And let's just come up to my Revit Enscape settings. Let's go into Advanced and say turn on Revit Live Camera. And that will actually show me a Revit camera inside the model located where my Enscape view is. If you keep an eye on that camera inside of Revit and watch what happens when I move my head inside of Enscape, the camera will rotate around. If I walk forwards and backwards, the camera will move. I also have the ability to drag the camera around inside of Revit if I want to move the Enscape camera. However, for the purposes of today, that's just showing me where I am and where I'm looking. Because I'm live inside of Revit, I can do any piece of Revit functionality and have this live visualization or live, nicer to look at coordination view update. Take this window for example. I can grab the window, I can come into its type properties and maybe change it from a 10 meter width window to a 4.5 meter width window. Update that with inside of Revit. Without pressing anything, Enscape updates instantly. I'm going to take that window and just move it along. Let's say that we want it approximately 2.5 meters from the wall on the left hand side. And then we want to take that, we want to create similar windows. And we're going to create a similar window here. And another similar window just here. I'm then going to make sure I grab both of those and set their sill height so it's the correct size. So let's grab this window and we'll put their sill height at, I think probably 750 is okay for this, just to raise them up a little bit. So we can actively work inside of Revit and have it change the output. Where that's really exciting for me is if I just show you one button here, which is VR headset enable. You could potentially have your client or another designer sat with an Oculus Rift headset or a HTC Vive headset walking around the building. You could be sat inside of Revit or SketchUp or Rhino. The application works in both of those systems as well. And you can make a change inside the CAD system. The CAD system will send the updates directly to Enscape, which means your VR headset, your virtual environment if you like, will automatically update as well. It doesn't matter if you are adding or changing geometry, changing a material, deleting geometry, moving geometry, whatever you might be doing, you have the ability inside of Enscape to do things live inside of your authoring tool, live inside of Revit, and physically go in and update the model and the render live at the same time. It processes things very, very quickly, it works extremely well, and it does exactly what you would expect it to do with ease. Now, the system from that perspective is so easy to use. But actually, again, it doesn't stop there. Remember when I started this, I started it using my default 3D view. For instance, let's just go across into that default 3D view in Revit. So I'm active in the same view. And then using that view, I'm just going to come down and turn on a section box and press apply. This is the coordination side of things coming into effect. Now, turning on the section box just takes a little couple of seconds for it to update the view, for obvious reasons. But imagine if you could come in and just make any change to a view, whether it's hiding a component, whether it's making component an override, a different color, or whatever it might be. We have the ability to physically come inside of our authoring tool and chop and change the section box, the look and feel that we have inside of our model. So in Enscape, we're currently looking at the 3D view. Inside of Revit, I have come into the 3D view and I've turned on the fact that I want to work with a section box, just by putting a tick in the box, essentially. By doing that, it exports the view a second time, generally much quicker than the first time we've done it, but it exports the view with a section box turned on physically inside of Enscape, which is controlled by the same section box that we're looking at inside of Revit. So should I select that section box, which for some reason is causing me a few problems at this particular point in time, let's just go into a floor plan inside of Revit, close hidden windows, and then go back into my 3D view. With that section box selected, we should be able to get the grips and move it around. For some reason, this particular model at this point in time, my section box not quite moving, so I'll do it a slightly different way. Let's go through to my first floor plan. Let's put a window around my my building and the area that I would like to put a section box around. So I'm just going to use a slightly different piece of functionality just because my Revit's having a little bit of an argument with me, so to speak. So let's just put a selection box around something inside of Revit. Turn on my section box, slightly different way. This will again update Enscape very quick. I can then hopefully this time get my grips when I select my section box, which will then allow me to bring the top of the section box down and turn off the roofs, the windows, so on and so forth. Again, for some reason it's not letting me modify that. It's not. There we go. Got it. So let's just pull that down at the top. Not quite sure what it was doing there. It was still thinking. So I've created a section inside of Revit. Standard functionality, nothing overly difficult. But again, if I just jump straight back into Enscape, just making full screen, it has taken the section out from Enscape. So now I can look either from the outside of my building down on my section, or I could be inside the building, looking at what's underneath the floor, looking at the void space, at the HVAC or the piping that's running through the void space. And again, it's all live, so I can jump back into Revit and make a change to any individual area of that section. Again, it's not quite live when you do this, so it's got to regenerate inside of Enscape, as you'll see at the bottom left here in the center of the screen, but it's still quick. Usually what you do is you have these 3D views pre-configured and predefined inside of Revit. Because Enscape references exactly the same 3D views that we have inside of Revit, we can instantly change from one view to the other with ease. Let's just close Enscape down there for a second and just show you that as well as working with models that you already have, it's just as quick to work with a brand new model. And again, I just want to do this section just to really make sure that you understand how out of the box and user friendly this application is, because I can open up a completely blank template. You'll notice from the naming conventions, if you are familiar with Revit, they're the completely default look and feel, the default template, the default objects and default materials. So we're just going to come in and we can create a very, very straightforward building. So let's just say that we want to have, I don't know, about 9 meters, relatively small, should be fine for the example today. Let's come down 12.5 and just do a little jot out here at the side. So we've got some external walls. Those external walls are completely out of the box. Let's go ahead and put on a floor. Let's just go for selecting those existing walls here and maybe just have that as a ground floor. Again, completely out of the box family. Maybe we want to go in and put some windows on. So let's add some windows, slightly larger than the default. Maybe we want to load in one of the default families. So let's go to my metric library. Let's search for windows and maybe go and grab one that's got a bit more detail to it. That one will do. Let's bring them in. Pick one of the larger ones for this instance here and just start loading in those windows. I'm not fussed about how many I have. I'm not doing anything accurately here, as you can see. I'm just coming in and just placing a few components inside of Revit. So let's come in and place a few windows. Let's come and do the same thing with the door. So let's just place a door in here. Let's load that in from my default library again. Let's go for external doors and maybe grab full length glaze. That should look quite nice. Let's just bring him in over here. And then what we're going to do alongside that is we're going to say, let's go to my ceiling plans. Let's add on ceiling, plain ceiling or a grid. Well, let's say this is going to be a little office here. So let's add a 6x600 grid in that section there. Alongside that, I'm just going to go on to my level 1. It's going to be single story here. So let's add a roof. Let's just say that we want to go for a flat roof. We're going to say that we want to have an overhang of around about 300 mil and no slope. Put that all the way around the outside here. And then maybe we'll just grab this one and just define a slope on here. Just 5 mil or something like that, just so we've got some drainage. Attach the walls to the roof. So we've got a very, very simple Revit model. Nothing overly complicated. I'm just going to go in here and add a second slab. I'm going to be very, very lazy. So I'm going to add a floor. I'm going to use the outside of the walls that we already have, just to go all the way around the outside of the building and then some more. You'll see why in just a second. So let's grab all of those. Let's then offset all of those by, I don't know, 5-10 meters is probably okay for this example, and just place them around the outside of the building, like so. Use a bit of trim to corner just to tidy those up. And then I'm going to go in and create a duplication of this slab. Be very lazy and just take out all of the structure of that apart from the structural level. And I'm going to come in and use a default Revit material called grass from my default Revit library, my standard Autodesk AEC libraries. Pick grass, apply, OK. I'm then going to do exactly the same thing. Let's just edit that boundary a second and just grab maybe a circle just here, just to take a circle out of that slab. And then maybe I'll create a second slab. Normally you'd do this with topo, but again, for the purpose of today, this is fine. And let's create a slab in there. Again, we're going to duplicate this one, use a completely out of the box Revit technology or Revit material. And this time we'll grab water, again from Autodesk's default library. So, nothing complicated what I've done there at all. Now from a Revit perspective, if I came in and turned on realistic, it thinks about it and it gives me something that looks very nice. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I just go into Enscape, 3D view, go, again literally it's one button. So I can press that single button, I wait for it to load, and not only has that gone in and given me something that instantly looks better than what you can get out of the box, we have again fully rendered grass. We have realistic lighting and shadows. We have fully animated water with reflections. And we have the ability to start walking around our model and making decisions based on that model. It's instant, it's live, it does exactly what you would expect it to do based on the functionality that you've seen already this morning. Finally, I haven't showed you a material change before, so let's grab this ground floor that we've got here. Let's edit its top finish face. and I'm just going to be lazy rather than adding a second finish. I'm just going to change this to oak flooring. Again, standard, Revit, oak flooring. Change it in Revit, will automatically send the change over to Enscape. And obviously because of that, it changes the dynamic of the whole environment. So, very, very powerful piece of software. But above that, as well as doing this live and being able to coordinate with our model live and change the time of day, so on and so forth, and whatever it is that you want to do, we can also get outputs, because it's important to note that we can save outputs from Enscape. We can take a screenshot and save it straight to a file. That's really useful if you're happy with the quality that Enscape's giving you on the screen at a given point in time. It's the same as saving a ray traced output if you like. I could say screenshot to file, save it on my desktop, Enscape will go through and it will save a screenshot of that image at that point in time, and it will save it onto your Windows desktop, like so. You can change the output sizes and settings of that directly through the Enscape options. Alongside that, you also have the ability to do panoramas. So we can take Google Cardboard VR directly from inside of here at the press of a button, or mono, non-Google Cardboard VR, so that you could just scroll around it on a website or an iPhone, and again you could do that at the press of a button. Very quick, very easy. We can do animations, but above and beyond all of that, you can actually just say, go ahead and create me a self-contained executable file. What this does is it takes the contents of Enscape and it saves as a self-containable executable file. That self-contained executable file does not need Revit, does not need Enscape, and does not need a license to run. It's a free viewer that you can open up on any machine and run without any issues whatsoever, without any problems whatsoever. You still need to have a fairly half-decent machine. You wouldn't want to run it with onboard graphics, for example. You'd want to have a semi-decent machine to be able to run that. But it gives you the ability to find the exe, double-click it. Again, it's fully customizable. You have the ability to change these loading screens and the icons that are displayed on your desktop, so on and so forth, to make it really personal to your organization or the client. And now we're looking through exactly the same thing, but we're not inside of Revit. We are in something that doesn't need a license. It's completely the same as your output settings that you had inside of Enscape at the time of exporting. And really, that's kind of all we like to show with regards to Enscape. It's a very, very powerful piece of software that has a lot of customization ability to get some extremely good quality look and feel inside of your Autodesk Revit. It doesn't matter if you're starting from scratch with a brand new project. It doesn't matter if you've got a project that you've been working on for several months and you want to maybe go in and do some virtual reality around that. You want to be able to go in and do some live coordination with something that looks a little bit nicer than maybe your standard Navisworks views or your standard Revit views. We have the ability to take a model, access views that already exist inside of Revit, and get them rendered very quickly, very easily, using the intelligence of collisions, walking around, realistic lighting, soft shadows, so on and so forth, inside of your modeling tool. It doesn't need any special technical know-how. I mean, you've seen from what I've showed you this morning how easy this is to use. If you can use Revit, you can use this without any problem at all. And from my perspective, the biggest benefit is being able to work live inside of your authoring tool, Revit in this case, but remember the plugin works for both SketchUp and Rhino as well. To instantly make a change in Revit and have that change pushed straight to your rendered output, if you like, without any waiting, without any difficulty with things not updating the way that you were expecting them to, or whatever it might be. We have the ability to get really some quite stunning imagery without any difficulty whatsoever. Those of you that have used things like 3ds Max or Maya before and are more aligned with making bump maps, making normal maps, changing the lights, working with the photometric properties of the lights, we do all that inside of Revit. We just use Revit's default functionality to add normal maps, add bump maps, change the photometric properties of a light, and Enscape will just read those and it will just work with them. So have confidence that it can give you a very good result, and it can give you that very good result extremely quickly. So hopefully that's been useful. Hopefully it's given you an idea of what Enscape can do. It's a very cheap plugin for what it does. It's a very accessible plugin with minimal to no training requirements. And if you're interested to see what it does in virtual reality, check out our YouTube channel. I've got a video on there where I show Enscape specifically inside of virtual reality. It's a press of a button. Again, it's very, very straightforward. So I hope that's been useful. And until next time, if there's any questions, drop us a mail, drop us some comments, and we'll get back to you soon.